this webinar. And there we go, the computer's telling me that we are live and official. And so my name is Jackie de Lange. I am part of the Joy magazine team. Many of you who've signed on tonight are familiar with Joy. We are the only English Christian magazine that is sold throughout South Africa, educating, equipping, and informing Christians with a biblical worldview. And what does that mean? Well, in essence, it is how do you take the Word of God and the principles of Christianity and apply it to every area of life, whether that be education, business, politics, even in this instance, to freedom of speech and human rights. And so it is such a pleasure for us to partner with 4SA. Many of you that have signed in tonight are familiar with 4SA and the phenomenal work that they do over the last few years as they formed, and they have just gained incredible traction, filling a very important mandate in our country. And so tonight on this webinar, we are very pleased to and privileged to have several of the 4SA team with us. I'm going to be introducing them to you a bit later. And basically, for the next 4 Mondays, we are going to be addressing really critical and important issues that we feel Christians in South Africa need to know about, need to be mobilized about, and need to unite in action. Sometimes we have to put works to our faith, we have to put deeds to our actions, because Christians cannot be passive. In the world that we live in today, with the onslaught against our Christian values, we have to take a stand for Christ, and that often means we have to do something. And so we are very privileged to have an organization like 4SA in this country who are fighting the good fight on our behalf within the space of the judiciary, with government, with civil society. And so tonight you're going to learn a little bit more about them, and more importantly, some of the critical issues that we as the church and Christians are dealing with right now. Of course, that relates very much to the lockdowns, the COVID pandemic, the legislation and the rules. And so it is a very important session. So you guys can get comfortable at home, and we welcome your questions. We want you to engage with us. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see there is a chat function. If you have any questions during the course of tonight, please, there is no such thing as a stupid question. So you are more than welcome to put your question into the chat section, and we will do our best to address it tonight in our webinar. And if for some reason we can't get to it, then of course, when you put your question in, we will do our best to address it offline with you via email or even next week. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, first of all, Michael Swain to you. He is the Executive Director of 4SA, and he is a fantastic asset to the team. He often liaises between the churches and the media, and he comes with decades of experience. Then, of course, we have attorney Daniela Ellerbach, and she is the 4SA legal advisor. So she also works on many of the policies and legislations and drafts that 4SA is busy with. And of course, we have someone who is no stranger to the Christian world, because she's made very interesting videos. Each time Cyril Ramaphosa speaks, I wait for Nadine's video so I can know exactly what the president said and did not say. And that is advocate Nadine Bardenhost. She is part of the legal counsel for 4SA. And again, these are the top guys who really know what they're talking about. So without further ado, good evening, team. And please wave and say hello and give us a shout out.
Hi, Jackie. Wonderful to be with you. Yeah, really brilliant. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you for everybody for joining. Yes, look forward to it.
Wonderful. So we've obviously got a lot to address tonight, so I'm going to move quite quickly through all of the questions. And of course, that is why we also record these sessions, because you guys, many of you may want to rewatch it at a later stage and digest some of the information that you're hearing. So first and foremost, one of the main reasons we felt that these webinars were so important is because we have seen the consistent onslaught against Christians, Christian organizations, churches, and various entities in South Africa, whether it is through human rights and freedom of speech, the hate speech bill that many of you really got mobilized to sign up for recently. And of course, all of this can be overwhelming sometimes when we get this information and we think as the layperson at home, what can I do? What difference can I make? And that is why we have an organization like 4SA that has really stood in the gap and come to the fore. So Michael, I want to begin by asking you, how and why and when did 4SA start?
Well, 4SA was founded some 8 years ago. And interestingly, it was founded as a consequence of an atheist couple who lived in the vicinity of a local church here in Cape Town, who obviously weren't very happy with the church, getting onto the church's website, and they'd recently done a parenting seminar, and they put up a PDF manual on their website that you could download. Well, this couple downloaded the website, the PDF manual from the website, cherry-picked out let's call them the spare the rod, spoil the child scriptures from Proverbs, reported the church to the South African Human Rights Commission, and the South African Human Rights Commission, which we must remember is an institution of state, then filed an action against the church, against the pastor. They were demanding that the pastors of the church were sent for sensitization training. They were saying that they should never preach or teach on that topic again, and that they should remove those scriptures from their teaching materials. And interestingly enough, the pastor phoned me at the time and told me, I first of all was almost aghast. I couldn't believe it was true. But then we had a discussion and I said to him, look, this is foursquare a religious freedom matter. You cannot allow any institution of state or legal precedent be set which prohibits you from freely teaching and expressing your faith, particularly the scriptures. And so on the basis of that, the pastor connected with advocate Nadine Bardenhost, who had recently joined the church, and they founded 4SA, and very quickly, I should say, discovered that this was really the tip of the iceberg. Because the erosion of religious freedom rights, which is a fundamental human right, it is not just one human right, it's like a basket. It's freedom of conscience, thought, belief, opinion, expression, association, assembly. Many of these foundational rights are actually encapsulated in freedom of religion. And they then formed this organization to defend that. And as I said, very quickly discovered this is like a global agenda. This is coming at us from all sides. So we are very importantly equipped now, and we've been doing this for some years, standing in the gap, watching everything that's happening in this space, not just here, but internationally. By the way, in South Africa, we are a lot better off than overseas. I heard just this past week that a pastor was arrested simply for literally reading scriptures in public. One of our colleagues in the UK, who runs a program called the Wilberforce Academy, they have been banned from a college in Cambridge simply because somebody complained about the fact that they were teaching about Christianity or preaching about Christianity. So here we're a lot better off, but it's only, I think, because we're holding the line and we're standing on our constitutional rights to religious freedom.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, Michael, from when 4SA started, Nadine, you would know, having been there from the beginning till today, the pace is just accelerating with the onslaught against Christians and Christian values. So Nadine, can you share with us on a practical level, what does 4SA actually do? And what is your role as far as, you know, standing up for Christian rights?
Yeah. So Jackie, I think it's important to firstly define what is religious freedom. And religious freedom, our constitutional court, which is the highest court in the country, has often said is the freedom to believe in our hearts whatever we want to believe or not believe. So in our case, obviously the Bible, the whole Bible, even the parts people don't like, don't agree with or find offensive. But not only that, it also includes to be able to freely share our beliefs, whether it's with a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, whether we do it on social media or from the pulpit, but then also to freely live out our beliefs, you know, and not just in the privacy of our homes or in the church, but in the marketplace out there. So it's all three of those components. And with the freedom to believe in our hearts, there isn't really an issue. But the issue comes when you say what you believe and you live out your beliefs. And so what 4SA does is we get involved anywhere really where religious freedom, and particularly the freedom to say what we believe and live out our beliefs, where that is threatened, whether it be before government, where government issues policies, government policies, and we see a threat to religious freedom, then we get involved, we meet with government, we make submissions. And the same with any bills, draft legislation that come out before Parliament. We scan them on a daily basis to see, are there any potential threats for our freedom to live out our beliefs, to share our beliefs? Then again, we will make submissions, verbal and written submissions to Parliament to make sure that religious freedom remains protected in the bill that is ultimately accepted. And then finally, before the Chapter 9 institutions, Michael's already referred to the Human Rights Commission. There are other commissions, the CRL Rights Commission, the Gender Equality Commission. We get involved there, as well as, of course, in the courts, right from the magistrates' courts up to the Constitutional Court. Wherever religious freedom is threatened, we will get involved to make sure that religious freedom has the maximum protection. And that is not only for the Christian faith, of course, but the principle of religious freedom, that it remains protected, because what goes for the one goes for the other. And so therefore, we stand for the principle of religious freedom.
Absolutely. And that, of course, has really risen to the fore of late with a number of things that the government is trying to bring into place, whether it is on the hate speech bill, whether it is with the PAPUDA and the, sexual education policies that are going into schools. And most notably, obviously, what I think has really awakened many Christians is the issue of COVID and lockdowns and churches being able to open and close, because never in our lifetime did we think that we would have the government telling us, much like communist China, when you can open and close and how many people can be in your service. So we will get into COVID and the lockdown in a second, but I want to just ask you quickly, 4SA is a non-profit organization. It is a non-denominational organization, which means you obviously serve the whole body of Christ. So how do you actually have income, and how do you, for what lack of a better word, support yourselves? Because I can imagine it costs a lot of money to make these legal applications. Just the paper alone, to print out all the paperwork, must amount to a lot of money. So how do you guys function on a financial and an operational level?
But to be candid, that's been our challenge right from the beginning, because we have literally been so busy, and we're a relatively small team, as you know, that we haven't really done the due diligence to raising the type of funding that we actually do need. So all our funding at the moment comes from some churches, some church organizations and individuals. But it is really a very, I have to say, negligible amount by contrast to what we actually would ideally like and even need to do the work that we do. So we are certainly trusting and hoping that people will understand and appreciate the value that we add, and they would therefore, in a sense, reciprocate by adding value back to us. So you can do that obviously on our website. There's a donate button, hopefully pretty much front and central when you come onto the website, and there are multiple options for giving. So we absolutely would appreciate and even need any gift. And there's no gift that's too small. I mean, even a 50 Rand a month gift, for example, would basically cover pretty much all our paper costs for 6 months, because you can buy 2 reams of paper with 600 Rand. So I don't think that a small amount is too small. Everything makes a difference.
Well, thanks, Michael. And I certainly feel very passionate about that, because the work that you guys do is really out there on the front lines, and it's generational. You are fighting for the next generation. And sometimes that's not the warm and fuzzy giving that we as Christians are used to putting money towards. You know, we often think about orphans and feeding programs and evangelism. But on a societal and cultural and generational level, the work you do is critical, because if you don't uphold our religious freedoms in the governmental and judicial space, we won't be able to do any of the other work of the church either. Absolutely. And that leads me
it's
to
the baseline.
Sorry,
it's the baseline. It's the baseline.
It's the baseline. Absolutely. And so that leads me to the next question that I want to pitch to you, Nadine, which is, when COVID started and the National Disaster Act was instituted, I think everybody, April last year, thought, okay, well, it's a short amount of time. It's not a big deal. The government has our best interest at heart. So at the end of the day, let it be. But often, as we've heard, the frog in a boiling pot of water analogy, if the heat gets turned up ever so slightly and the freedoms get eroded ever so slightly, traded for the common good ever so slightly, eventually you found yourself in a very precarious position. So in terms of COVID and the lockdowns and being able to control churches and who can meet and how they meet, what right does the government have to limit these religious freedoms simply because of a pandemic? Is this the way it's going to be forever? Do we as Christians just roll over and go, oh, well, it's the greater good? Or do we fight? Can we make a difference?
Such an important question, Jackie. So just to explain from a legal point of view, that obviously religious freedom is a constitutional right. It's a fundamental human right that every person has simply because they're human beings. That right is written into the Constitution, so it's very important. However, religious freedom, like any other rights, the right to equality, the right to freedom of assembly, so in other words, to meet together, any of the constitutional rights, none of them are absolute. And that means that they can be limited by another right or even by a law, like the Disaster Management Act. But importantly, it can only be limited, any fundamental right can only be limited or restricted under certain conditions. And those conditions are also set out in the Constitution, in Section 36 of the Constitution. So we'll often refer to the Section 36 limitations test. And basically what that section says is that any fundamental right, in other words, also religious freedom and the right to physically meet together to exercise our faith, can be limited if firstly there's a good reason to do so, if it's reasonable and justifiable, taking into account a number of factors. And those factors include, well, what's the reason that you want to limit people being able to gather together? How important is that reason? How far does that limitation go? Do you completely ban religious gatherings altogether, or do you say, well, people can still meet, but only in smaller groups? Are there less restrictive ways in which that right can be restricted or limited? So that all of that falls within the ambit of Section 36. And so importantly, to come back to your question, yes, we have the right to religious freedom. And importantly, courts around the world have recognized that that right includes the right to physically meet together in person with other believers to exercise the faith, not just the right to sit at home and watch remotely. So yes, we have that right, but that right can be limited, but only if government meets those conditions. And then the question, of course, is in this instance, well, has government met those conditions? And that's really where the rubber hits the road. And we would submit that certainly when there was a complete ban on religious gatherings across the country for, I think, a period of about a month in December and January, that exceeded the limitations test. That went too far, particularly in circumstances where people were able to meet in big numbers at restaurants, cinemas, casinos, conferences, fitness centers, and yet the religious community was singled out and there was a complete ban that was placed on religious gatherings. And it's for that reason that Forrest I actually went to court to challenge the lockdown regulations in that regard.
So obviously you succeeded with your challenge, because we sit now and we have level 1 and we are enjoying a little bit more freedom. But of course, if history's taught us anything, those lockdown levels can change overnight. And at the end of the day, we actually are not in control, even though we think we are. So
So Jackie, maybe I can just interject there. It's really been a two-pronged approach. I mean, on the one hand, we launched a court case and it was launched on an urgent basis in January to lift that complete ban. And that court case is still ongoing, because even though at that stage, a day before the time, the government said, all right, we concede, we'll lift the ban. It's still very important to establish the principles, relating to the reasons for which government can limit religious gatherings and the extent to which governments can limit religious gatherings, particularly in view thereof that we're expecting at least a fourth wave of the COVID pandemic. There may be more. So we need to establish legal precedent regarding the extent to which and the reasons for which government can interfere with our fundamental human rights. So there's a court challenge that is still upcoming. It's going to be heard in the month of November. But then also in the last year and a half, 4SA has continuously been meeting with government, including I myself have personally met with President Ramaphosa in meetings, have personally made representations on behalf of the religious community, at times representing a constituency of up to 18 million people. We've met with Culture Minister Dlamini Zuma. So there's really been a two-pronged approach of, on the one hand, the court challenge, and on the other hand, the political engagement that has been so important at every step as the regulations have changed.
Yes. So as far as the court case going forward in November, what do you guys hope to achieve? I mean, is it even possible to force government to recant some of their draconian rules, or is it just the way it is?
Yeah. So as I said, initially it was instituted, Jackie, on an urgent basis because there was a complete ban on gatherings when other gatherings were allowed to continue. So obviously that urgency then fell away when government the very next day changed the regulations, but some of the issues remain pertinent. And in particular, we will be going to court to ask the court to find that that complete ban on religious gatherings at a time when other gatherings were allowed to continue, that amounted, in fact, to an infringement of the religious community's constitutional rights. And the reason, again, for that is so that if there's a further wave and a further wave, that government doesn't again do that, doesn't again unfairly discriminate against the religious community when other gatherings are allowed to continue. Secondly, we will also be asking the court to find that government's failure to properly consult with the religious community at every kind of step, so to speak, at every round, that was unlawful. And finally, we will also ask that religious workers, who to this very day have not been explicitly recognized in the lockdown regulations as essential workers, that they be specifically written into the lockdown regulations as essential workers. And by the way, similar applications have been launched by the Muslim Lawyers Association, the South African National Christian Forum, as well as Solidariteit Helpende Hand. And all of these applications will be heard together from the 22nd to the 24th of November this year. So a very important case to come up, as I say, to establish legal precedent going forward.
Absolutely. And apart from the financial contribution that one can give to FORSA, certainly prayer is so needed for the work you do, and for that court case in particular. So I know at the magazine, we will certainly put out news at the time that people pray for you, because you guys really have a daunting task ahead of you. And I want to ask you, you know, one of the things that really shocked a lot of Christians was how quickly the Disaster Management Act came into being, and the National Command Council just appeared out of nowhere. And there was a very much a communist bent to it, because we just saw these sort of proclamations being made, and overnight, literally, as the president speaks, that's it, it's implemented, no warning. Does the government actually, you know, how did we find ourselves in the situation where they can do that? Are there any checks and balances that the government has on themselves to make sure that that power is not abused? Because one of the fears of many Christians is that, I'm not speaking specifically for this regime, but for any government, if they've now realized that using a National Disaster Act and a pandemic, in this instance, it could be something else in the next time, is an excuse to just implement this overnight law and draconian control, what is to stop them doing it again and again, and for us to just remain at a level 1, 2, 3, or 4 indefinitely?
Well, that was really the problem. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, government obviously was faced with a situation that they needed to take urgent and very drastic action. And what they did was they initiated the National Disaster Act, and they basically declared a state of national disaster. Now, the problem with that is that typically, if you have an emergency situation, some absolute crisis, then the government may declare a state of emergency. And what that means is that all your constitutional rights are suspended, but only for 21 days. And every time they want to extend it, then they have to come back and they have to get Parliament to specifically agree on an additional extension. The National Disaster Act basically meant that they could declare a national state of disaster, which basically is only up to them to actually overturn. Because once they did that, then the power, believe it or not, transferred to the COCTA Ministry, the Ministry of Cooperation and Traditional Affairs. And they literally can issue by almost fiat regulations which pretty much govern every aspect of our lives. And the challenge with that is that there is no parliamentary or other accountability. And it can literally be extended and extended and extended. It was never designed for this purpose. It was designed for the sort of situation whereby maybe there would be an earthquake in the Western Cape or some flood in KZN or something. And then you immediately can throw, resources or do whatever you need to do. But we are now literally 556 days into lockdown. And essentially, a small group of the executive are ruling the country with next to no real accountability back to Parliament or to anybody else for that matter. So one of the things which is obviously coming out of this is that act is up for amendment. And that amendment, we actually, for SA, made submissions a couple of weeks ago now, will give a much higher level of accountability back to Parliament, so that in the event that it needs to be extended, Parliament will be involved, and other affected parties. Obviously, in our instance, we're interested in how it impacts the religious sector. They will be engaged as well. That's what we would like to see at the end of it.
Well, I certainly hope that does happen, because I think even Parliament themselves have seen how they can so quickly be sidelined, and they also are used to having
very
a lot of
dangerous.
power themselves.
Yeah,
very dangerous, exactly. So let's go to those of us who were watching international media, particularly last year, saw that there were quite a lot of similar type of court challenges overseas, particularly in America. There were pastors who were taken to jail. They were imposed heavy penalties, but actually the US courts recanted, and many of them actually were issued apologies. So what does the situation look like overseas?
Jackie, it's for that very reason, actually, that we believe we have a very strong case when we look at the international jurisprudence that has come out in courts around the world, UK, Europe, America, Latin America. So I just want to extract two main principles that have come out of those court cases. The first one is that they have said that remote viewing, online broadcasting is not the same as believers being able to physically meet in person to exercise their faith. And that right of believers to physically meet in person together to exercise their faith is a core and an integral component of the right to religious freedom. In fact, the highest court in Scotland, where a similar challenge was brought, regarded online broadcasts as worship light. They said at best it's a very poor alternative to meeting in person. So that's very important, because even in our instance, government says, no, but you can watch online. But how many people in our country, in a third world country, actually have the data, have the IT to be able to just stream online? And as the courts have said, and that is confirmed also by the US Supreme Court, the highest court in America, that you cannot simply say, well, people should watch online. That is not what is guaranteed by the right to religious freedom. So that's the first principle. The second important principle that the courts around the world are virtually unanimous on is that religious gatherings ought to be treated the same as other gatherings. In other words, you cannot single out religious gatherings for discrimination when people are allowed to still gather at casinos, at cinemas, at restaurants, at fitness centers, which is exactly what happened here when we had the complete ban on religious gatherings. So for instance, the Supreme Court of America had a huge problem with the fact that the state of Nevada allowed people to go to casinos, to Caesar's Palace specifically, but not to go to church. And I'm going to quote here, the court said, there is no world in which the Constitution permits Nevada to favor Caesar's Palace over Calvary Chapel. And the same, frankly, can be said of our Constitution. So it doesn't help the government to say, no, but religious gatherings have proven themselves to be super spreaders, or they have the potential to be super spreaders. And then they refer to the Bloemfontein event, which took place, I think it was last year, March, at a time when COVID wasn't even on the map, or it hardly came onto the map. We certainly in South Africa didn't know about COVID at the time, and no COVID protocols were in place. So what we're saying is, show us the evidence that where there is a religious gathering that is taking place, where all the COVID protocols are in place, sanitization, masks, social distancing, and yet it is a super spreader. And there simply is nothing. And it's then ludicrous to argue that people can go to a restaurant where they can sit closely together. I mean, we hardly ever see social distancing in restaurants. People sit right next to one another, opposite one another, masks down, because they eat and drink, and they can do that for the whole night, however long they want to, and yet they can't walk cross the road to the church and wear their masks and sit 1.5 meters apart. It's just unfair discrimination towards the religious community. And that is what even the international courts are saying. So we believe we're on a strong footing, and we're trusting the court will agree with us when it's heard in November.
Well, that's wonderful to know, and certainly very encouraging. Something that was not very encouraging for me over the last few months was to see that there is a little bit of dissension in the body of Christ between churches, church leaders, and their different viewpoints when it comes to standing up to government and resisting the draconian laws. Now, I understand that, as Christians, we're not always going to agree on everything when it comes to the finer details, especially in the realm of are you passive or are you actively resisting various things? But that was something that obviously was quite concerning, and probably, I think, for you guys as well, you would have experienced a bit of a blowback with churches saying, why is 4SA pushing this issue and isn't pushing for churches to meet in person, endangering people's lives? What is your response or your opinion on that critique?
I think that it's important to note that, religious freedom means that you can believe whatever you want to believe, and different churches will have a different emphasis on which will guide them in whatever decision that they take. So one thing we've said from the very beginning with these different lockdown levels, when obviously people have been allowed to meet, is just because you can meet, obviously doesn't mean to say that you must meet. What we've said right from the beginning is that religious leaders particularly should have the discretion, obviously within the parameters of the guidelines, on whether or not they hold events or worship services or whatever it may be at their buildings, whether they decide to let's have gatherings again. And equally, it's the same situation for the individual member of that congregation. They can also take we believe, their own health risks into account and make a decision whether or not to attend. So religious freedom is obviously doctrinally neutral. And there are some churches who have decided, and they're entitled to decide, that while there is a danger to the health of their parishioners or whatever, that they will not reopen. Fair enough, good for them. They're entitled to that. But that doesn't mean to say that those people who decide that they would like to resume gatherings should be in any way prohibited from doing so. So it has been a balancing act, if you like. But again, we believe that religious leaders, particularly who are responsible for looking after their own congregations, they should have the prerogative. Yeah. They should take that decision.
Absolutely. So let's jump from I can't remember the saying, but from the coal to the fire or something like that.
Oh dear.
Yeah, let's touch on the favorite topic of the moment, which is mandatory vaccinations. So of course, this is getting a huge blowback from all quarters, those who are pro-vaccine, those who are anti-vaccine, those who sit in the middle and are undecided. But when you see companies like Discovery and you see some of the larger banks making statements that they will insist that their employees get vaccinated, and I think Discovery went as far as to say that even people visiting their buildings, meaning even clients, have to be vaccinated. It poses an interesting dilemma, I think, because in South Africa we champion human rights, we champion our constitution, which obviously deeply entrenched in that is freedom of movement, freedom to earn a living, and the right to have access. But of course, the vaccine now pushes that in a very different direction. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot here and ask you, as a religious freedom organization, what is 4SA's position?
Michael?
I get the hot potato. Well, I think we should start off by saying emphatically that 4SA is not anti-vaccination. What we are obviously pro is people's ability to decide for themselves, as far as it is feasibly possible, and we believe that it should remain feasibly possible, whether or not to actually have the vaccination. So we believe that, again, individual rights are very important in this context and in this mix, but it is a complex question. I think probably it was very well put by the South African Human Rights Commission, who issued a statement earlier today. And essentially what they were saying was that because there is a multiplicity of constitutional rights involved, it should literally be like a last resort for government to consider any form of mandatory or compelled vaccination policy. That they need to do a lot more, at least according to the Human Rights Commission, we would certainly agree with that, to make sure that they persuade people rather than compel people, that they actually provide the good reasons why you should be vaccinated, rather than saying, well, we just decided that you must be vaccinated. So there are certainly multiple constitutional rights in play that we believe should definitely be respected. It shouldn't be just, well, let's just snap our fingers and force everybody to do so, literally, with severe sanctions potentially, if they decide not to. That should very much not be a part of a public health policy. It's pretty much unprecedented as a public health policy.
But let's be honest, Michael, and I'm going to challenge you on this one, but the government, like the Israeli government, they still maintain, we don't force anyone to get vaccines, but movie theaters will require it, businesses will require it, large gathering venues will require it. So they actually use the business entity and the entertainment space to actually enforce it. So I don't want to get off track with tonight's discussion, but I would be very interested to see what happens in the instance of Discovery and big companies themselves enforcing it, and if that in itself is legally allowed. And I don't want to get you guys into trouble commenting on that, but it's just something that I'm watching with interest, because I don't think government will enforce it, but they certainly are going to use other arms to push compliance.
Jackie, so maybe I can jump in there. We're certainly in an employment context. You know, it's very interesting because government has issued directions for employers how to deal with, obviously, how to cater for sanitization and health protocols and so forth in the workplace. And now most recently, they've also included how employers should deal with the whole issue of the vaccine. And they said explicitly that as far as possible, employers should respect the constitutional rights of their employees. And that, of course, includes their right to religious freedom. In other words, if they were to have a religious objection to taking the vaccine. And those directions specifically say that where an employee raises a constitutional objection, so whether it's a religious objection or different kind of objection, that employers have to, as far as possible, try and reasonably accommodate employees rather than just retrench them or fire them to say, this is our policy, and if you don't, fit in, well, then goodbye. And what the directions say specifically by reasonable accommodation is see if you can adapt the working environment. In other words, can the employee work remotely? Can the employee work in isolation? Can you prevent the risk or mitigate the risk simply by having the employee wear a proper mask? So employers actually have a duty in terms of even the regulations that government has issued for workplaces to see how, firstly, they can accommodate employees rather than just almost get rid of them. But of course, it'll be very interesting to see, because I think in the employment context is one of the contexts where there's very likely for court cases to emerge, and where an employee is maybe fired, whether it's on the basis of misconduct or retrenchment, because they raised the religious objection, to see, well, to what extent, can a religious objection argument fend off, or to what extent will it stand up to a law or a policy by an employer saying, well, you should be vaccinated. And then, of course, as you said, in other instances, similar challenges may arise. Are we going to need a vaccine passport to travel, to go into shopping malls, or even to attend church? I mean, they've talked about attending massive cultural events or sports events in big stadiums. And again, in that context, people may want to say, well, based on my religious convictions, I feel I don't want to have the vaccine. So are you now going to prevent me from going to the shop to buy bread and milk? And it's very difficult at this stage to say what a court will find, because every context, the facts will be so different. So it will be very much fact dependent. And referring back to what I explained earlier in terms of how the limitation of rights work, in every instance, the court will have to apply that Section 36 analysis and see, okay, so there is a limitation of rights here, say the right to stand on my religious convictions and beliefs, but to what extent can it be limited? Is there a good reason for government to limit it? In the case of a shopping mall, in the case of an aeroplane, in the case of a sports match, in the case of going to church, and to what extent can it be limited? So it's very difficult to predict with certainty how the courts will find, because so much will depend on the particular facts of the case, but certainly we are in for some interesting times ahead. What I can say is, you know, a lot of people have just raised this kind of thing of religious objection, but it will be very important in a court case to ground what that religious objection is based on. It will not be good enough to just base it on conspiracy theories. It probably won't be good enough to say, well, I believe it's the mark of the beast. You know, you can make that argument, but it probably won't fly before a court of law. And so we believe that there are, as Michael said, there are other constitutional rights that are implicated as well, including the right to your bodily security, the right to make your own decisions concerning your body, the right to have informed consent when anything medical experiment or something is being undertaken on you. And those rights will probably be the game changers. You know, they will probably be the rights that weigh more heavily with the court than the religious objection, even though in principle such an argument could be made. Interesting times ahead.
I think that said, that there have been cases, of course, where it is very much a fundamental tenet of a faith, like the Jehovah's Witness, for example. And there have been cases where a woman refused to have a blood transfusion and the court respected that decision even though she died. So they do take religious freedom rights seriously. There was a similar, but a very different case where a Jehovah's Witness mother did not want her baby to have a blood transfusion, but the court then overrode the mother because the rights of the child were paramount and the well-being of the child was paramount. But courts are typically very hesitant to just override people's religious freedom rights. And I think that's something else which is going to play into the situation.
And at the same time, it will not be good enough for government, as in the case of the lockdown regulations, to just say, well, in the interest of public health. No, that's only the first hurdle. They will need to show, do we need to go as extreme as making vaccinations compulsory, or are there less restrictive means? For instance, when people go to a shop, or let's use the example of going to a sports match, should we have an area where only unvaccinated people are seated, you know, separately from the vaccinated people? Or, I mean, that may sound like a silly example, but are there less restrictive means before government goes so far as to force everybody to be vaccinated? And those are all legal questions at the end of the day, with reference to science, of course, but those are the legal questions which the courts will have to grapple with. And again, it will be interesting in the days and the months to see what comes from the international courts, which again will play a huge role in terms of how our own courts will be viewing it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you guys have certainly given us a lot of food for thought, and I'm watching the time run away with us. But at the same time, I think that everyone at home can agree that these are really important, very relevant topics that we are discussing. And certainly you guys at home can see the need for these webinars. So I have seen some very interesting questions coming through, and we will address some of them in a moment. One of the questions that I had, which I see someone at home also asked, specifically they were speaking in regards to Nigeria, but I've heard that in the case of Zim, the government has said that people cannot attend church unless they are vaccinated. That is very scary for me to read that. And as the person at home who commented that they've heard a rumor that the same is in Nigeria, can you speak about if you think this is a real threat in South Africa, if it's something we need to be aware of, and again, why the work you do is so important to resist this draconian influence?
Well, it is a very important question, because there you would actually have religious freedom rights front and center. There was, say, a vaccine passport, and it would put a pastor potentially, or an imam, or any other religious leader in an invidious position, because to say no to somebody who wants to come to a religious gathering, particularly if you're a pastor, to say, no, you cannot come into the house of God. No, you cannot come in for prayer. That is something which pastors may feel, I would literally die on this battleground. And that may be something that you have to do, by the way, because at some point, yes, you can be in that invidious position. Should I obey man? And if I don't, I receive sanctions from the state, possibly a fine, possibly jail time. Or do I obey God? And if I don't, I'm going to face potentially eternal consequences. That's a terrible position to be in. But in that instance, if you decide, well, I'm going to obey God rather than man, obviously at the same time, you would have to be prepared to face the consequences of your decision. And yes, we for SA would see that squarely as a religious freedom issue, where religious freedom rights have been literally trampled upon in that instance. And that would be a case which we would argue very strongly on the basis of religious freedom rights, should that situation arise.
Well, I thank God for people like you guys and for SA, because fortunately we're not there yet. And I think it's because you have been pushing back against that tide and you are holding the front line. So I really thank you guys. And again, to those of you at home, I think what tonight's discussion has really highlighted is why we need to support organizations like 4SA, both financially, prayerfully, and publicly. When you guys put out calls to sign petitions and make our voices heard, that we need to do it. The time is now that Christians have to stand up. We can't sit at home in our couch and think someone else is going to do it, because before you know it, you end up being like a Zim or a China or a Nigeria, where your rights are infringed. So I want to just address one very important question that came through on the chat. And I know that there's 10 minutes left, so we will do our best to respect all of your time, because I know that Monday nights are busy. But let's just address this one. Michael, I'm going to pitch this to you, but Nadine, if you want to, chip in, please, by all means do. So Anthony Timvios, he's actually a pastor that I know very well. So I was very pleased to see that he's on here. And he asked, how do we as the body of Christ in South Africa address the situation whereby certain church leaders and churches act unbiblically, which fuels the media and provides government institutions with the validity for their argument to control church bodies? Now, all I need to say for that is the doom pastor, and we all know what situation I'm referring to. So can you tell us, what is 4SA's position on that? Because I would imagine that a lot of what government tries to do comes from a good space, that they want to limit the abuse of religious people and institutions. But of course, when you throw the baby out with the bathwater, out goes religious freedom. So how do we handle that? And how do you respond to that?
Well, we faced this attempt, if you like, for state regulation of religion for many years now. And it really began with the Cyril Rights Commission's report on the commercialization of religion and the abuse of people's belief systems, where they highlighted instances such as the so-called doom pastor, or the prophet of doom, or whatever he was called. But here's the important thing. Regulation of religion by the state is basically the death knell of religious freedom. If the state can ever take a decision, whether they do it directly or whether they do it through bodies that they've appointed to decide who is acceptable or not, to regulate what it is can or cannot be preached, that is the death knell of religious freedom. But it is equally important to understand that you can never hide an illegal act, something that you do which is unlawful, behind your so-called religious freedom rights. And every single one of the instances that we have ever seen, whether it's the prophet of doom, the snake eating, the sex trafficking of children, laundering of money, these are criminal offenses covered by existing criminal law. And the law is the law is the law. Whether you're a pastor, a policeman, a politician, or a postman, it doesn't matter. The law applies equally to you. And so we have simply said that there cannot be, if you like, an excuse of hyping up the media to point fingers at people who are actually committing criminal acts and somehow use that as a justification to regulate by the state the religious sector and to decide who can or cannot be a pastor, what you can or cannot preach upon. That is unacceptable. That is a fundamental erosion of religious freedom rights. And so we've been very strong on that. And fortunately, we've had tremendous support from the greater religious community as well.
So what do we do? And I think, Jackie, number one, when we read our Bibles, we see that false prophets, false teachers, by no means a new thing. They were there in Jesus' day, they were there in the disciples' day. So we shouldn't be surprised by the fact that 2,000 years later they're still around. And then I think there is the biblical responsibility in terms of how do we deal with them. Well, we call them out. We approach them. Many of them obviously are kind of laws unto themselves, but we still do the right thing. And then I think there is a responsibility to teach our people differently and to call out where we believe what they preach or what they do is heresy. Does not fall within in the biblical terms of what we understand, for instance, how we should deal with people in human dignity. And then thirdly, ultimately, if we're aware of a crime that is being committed in our community. It may be that we ourselves have a legal or a moral obligation to go report that to the police. Certainly, there are some laws that make it obligatory for every member of the public, if you know that crime is being committed, particularly in relation to financial crimes, then anyone who has such knowledge actually needs to report it. So it may be that we have that duty. So those are some of the things that we say people who become aware of that in their own communities, what they can do to address it.
And I think to that point as well, the fact that some people behave unethically and pastors or so-called pastors abuse their position doesn't mean that we must go along with having everything regulated, because for those of us who are in Christ and operating biblically, we still don't want our sermons regulated and what you can and cannot say, which is really the status quo in places like Canada and Scotland and some of those other societies.
There are enough laws in place, Jackie, to deal with all of those things. And if we had to be in favor of regulation, all we would do, as you say, is to regulate things which currently aren't regulated for good reason, and ultimately will impact on our own freedom of speech and freedom to practice our faith.
I think very importantly as well, there is a constitutional court judgment which has said that even if a belief that somebody holds is bizarre, irrational, illogical, incapable of scientific proof, it can be the weirdest thing in the world, it is protected by religious freedom rights in South Africa. And it cannot simply be overridden because somebody doesn't like it or think that it's weird, unless, of course, it amounts to something which is unlawful. That's a different matter. But you can believe in the man in the moon if you want to, and that is protected. And the state is not there, I repeat, not there to decide some form of Christian orthodoxy, that this particular brand of Christianity is the one that we will support. That is a recipe for terrible persecution. So we need to keep the religious sector free to believe whatever it is you want to believe, obviously within the bounds of lawfulness.
Absolutely. Well, as we close up tonight's session, I want to just thank you guys again for the tireless work that you do. I want to also thank everybody at home for signing on. There are quite a few questions that have come through that we've tried to address, and to those of you making comments, we really appreciate it. If you want to get in touch with 4SA, if you have any more questions or you want to support them financially by donating or by finding out what campaigns they're busy with and how you can get involved, please look in the chat section at the moment and you will find all of their contact details. Of course, you can also read their columns in the Joy magazine, which is on sale every month, and you can Google online and go to the 4SA website. We will, again, as I said, with all of these webinars, be recording them and putting it up on YouTube so that you can rewatch them and share them. I think if anything, tonight has shown those of us at home how critical it is that the church unites, stands up, uses its voice to proclaim the truth, to stand for the truth, and certainly to support people like Michael, Nadine, Daniela, and the 4SA team, because they really are fighting the battle on our behalf. And if there was ever anyone, a Christian sitting at home who thought that maybe the work that they do is simply pushing papers, I think that the last 18 months has shown you how incredibly important it is. So before you guys all sign off, I'm going to give Michael and Nadine a chance just to say goodbye, but I want to entice you to watch next week. Same time, same place. Put it in your calendar so that your Google Outlook or your emails can remind you. And the topic for next week, Monday, the topic is the global liberal agenda for faith, family, and freedom. And I have no need to elaborate on this. We all know there is an agenda. We all know that there are nefarious forces that are seeking to undermine biblical, conservative Christian values, and that is infiltrating at every level, whether it's media, government, but particularly in the schools and with education. And it is absolutely critical as parents, grandparents, business people that we know what this agenda is and how we can fight it. So over to the two of you for final words and good night and salutations.
Excellent. Thank you firstly to you, Jackie, for facilitating this wonderful opportunity to inform other believers regarding some of the threats that we are facing as believers. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's shown an interest in our work, who's been supporting us by making submissions, also financially. And please do keep praying for us and spread the word and get others to also join in next week and the 2 weeks thereafter. And then we'll see you again next week.
Yeah, and in the meantime, please follow us. Go to the Facebook page. We have Freedom of Religion SA on Facebook. We also obviously have our website. You can sign up for a free newsletter. You can join us. You can give us a limited mandate to represent you when we do the work that we do before governments and so on. And we just want to encourage you, please, as I said, donate to 4SA. We need those financial contributions so that we can continue to do the work that we believe we are called to do.
For faith and freedom.
For faith and freedom.
Amen. Well, good night, guys. Thank you, everybody, and see you next week.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.